Howdy guys, Jimmy Song here. Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Tech Talk Q&A. It is Monday, February 24th, and I do this show every Monday based on the newsletter that I send out every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Anyway, lot of stuff to cover today, and I will go over all of them. Let's see how everyone is doing. Hopefully you guys can see everything. But this is the newsletter that I send. It's Bitcoin Tech Talk, and it's now hosted on Substack. And I have a more narrative form, which I'll be more or less reading and commenting on. But yeah, it's a pretty, I basically cover all the interesting news, at least from a tech perspective and tech and economic perspective. And I want I think everyone should learn about and hear about and so on. So that's what this show is all about, and that's what we're going to talk about. But before I do that, let me just show a couple of things. The Little Bitcoin book is available on Amazon, and in Spanish and Portuguese. We're working on a couple of others, but yeah, we have a bunch of things going on with respect to that book, which we'll be announcing shortly. The other book that I have out is Programming Bitcoin, and it is from O'Reilly, and you can go order that on Amazon as well. And lastly, I have my seminars, Programming Bitcoin, the Programming Blockchain rather. And they are the next two times I'm going to give it are in San Francisco, March 25th and 26th, and Antwerp, Belgium, April 22nd and 23rd. So I would love to teach you guys. If you are interested, please apply here. All right, good stuff. So Bitcoin Tech Talk issue 176, what BCH teaches us about decentralization. All right, so let's get to it. Bitcoin Cash was created back in 2017 initially as a way to permanently split in case UASF gained traction. Despite the New York Agreement activation of SegWit on the network, they decided to split anyway and created the first hard fork of the Bitcoin. As the code had to be created quickly, there wasn't much in the way of decentralization in the hard fork. Now, a lot of people forget this, but basically, Bitcoin Cash was created more or less by Jihan Wu and a bunch of other miners, particularly the Via BTC guy, which we'll talk about in a bit, as sort of a defense against the user-activated soft fork, which was threatened to start on August 1st. The UASF made good on its threat and released the client, and there were a bunch of people that were ready to deploy it and so on. What happened was that they came up with BIP 91 and the New York Agreement, and all of that went through, essentially making it so that everyone would stay on one chain. But Jihan and others had funded the Bitcoin Cash, and that's what had happened back then. And that client, instead of going away quietly, which everyone expected, instead decided to split anyway. And that was a big deal. And that link goes to the article I wrote right around then, like literally a week before everything that was happening. I still remember writing this article. It was such a shock to me. I think I was at Costco, and I had read a couple things. I was like, oh, God, I got to go home and write about this again. But it was all about Bitcoin Cash and what it was doing, and it was kind of a crazy thing at the time. The trade-off that BCH made was that of increasing block size and getting rid of SegWit for decentralization. After 2.5 years, it's clear that trade-off was a mistake. The centralization has resulted in one split and resulted in BSV with another one that looks imminent. They went through one post-split, so they basically been divorced twice already, and it looks like they're going to divorce yet a third time. If you haven't been paying attention to the drama, the current controversy in BCH is called the Infrastructure Funding Plan, or IFP for short. It started with a post by Zhang Zhuer of BTC.top, who along with Haipo Yang via BTC, Jihan Wu, and Roger Ver proposed a plan where 12.5% of the block reward for 6 months would go to the BCH developers. Much of the community was upset by this, including Peter Risen, who made his BCH client, Bitcoin Unlimited, not accept the tax. The miners responded with changes from the initial proposal by reducing the tax to 5% using a BIP9-like activation scheme using 66% of miners needing to signal and naming the projects that would receive the funds, namely Bitcoin ABC, BCHD, and Electron Cash. In response to the community outrage, Roger Ver seems to have switched sides. So essentially, the proposal was presented. It was 12.5%. I've been talking about this for a little bit. Then Peter Risen, came out in opposition, along with most of RBTC. And basically, nobody liked the tax. Roger was defending it for a few days, and then he seems to have capitulated to the BCH community, or at least the community on RBTC, saying all that. So he's basically switched sides to be with Peter Risen. The miners responded with changes. So they had this updated proposal, and it was a miner donation plan update again. It will start by hash voting. 2/3 of the network hash agrees. 5% of the Coinbase donated by miners going to General Foundation, ABC, BCHD, and Electron Cash. Donation plan will last 6 months. There are numerous objections now. I am inclined to start the donation plan after the community reaches a basic agreement. If they fail to achieve it, we could set up the General Foundation first. Let's see the operating effect, funding by the donation. Then we could proceed to the hashing vote next time. Now, Zhang Zhuer is obviously not really a native English speaker, so a lot of this is a little bit confusing in his broken English and so on. But what I interpreted point 3 to mean is that, it's only a temporary thing. Point 4 is the crazy one, where it says basically, let's wait until we reach basic agreement. If there is no basic agreement, he's saying that we should just set up the General Foundation and fund the General Foundation in the meantime, and then we can choose who receives it or something like that. His stance seems to be that the tax is a good thing regardless, and maybe the objections are over who actually gets the money. So, Bitcoin ABC is Amory Sachet's client, and that's the original one that was created. And it's you should note that Haipo Yang and Jihan Wu were two of the biggest supporters, and they funded its development even before Bitcoin Cash existed. And it was, again, a way to sort of protect against the user-activated soft fork for the miners. Roger Ver seems to have switched sides. So he defended the proposal for like 4 or 5 days. In fact, I wrote an article saying how it was kind of deceitful, the original post by Zhang Zhuer. And he replied actually on my article saying, hey, you don't seem to understand what the word tax means. He was trying to defend it. Now he's like going and saying, well, I never really agreed to do it. They put my name on there. Like, it was just sort of an idea. I didn't want to be part of it. I mean, there could have been something lost in translation or something, but he seems to be waffling and trying to come out, on the positive end there. As with the last disagreement that led to the split, this one looks like a fundamental difference in the direction of the coin. Bitcoin ABC, Amory Sachet software has already implemented the IFP into their client. So they already put that on there, right? Like, IFP is in their software. So if, after May 15th or something like that, you mine a block and don't give money to the IFP, then you are going to be orphaned by everyone else who is running the ABC client. Bitcoin Unlimited explicitly rejects blocks implementing the IFP. So the two are now not compatible because Peter Risen came out against it. So his client, Bitcoin Unlimited, now rejects anything that pays to the IFP. So this is a permanent split. If both are run as it is, then it's definitely going to cause a split between the people running one set of software versus another. FTrader, a developer for Bitcoin ABC, has forked Bitcoin ABC and changed it to remove the IFP. So FTrader was actually one of the 2 developers I identified in the original article when I wrote about Bitcoin Cash. Essentially, Amory Sachet was pretty much the only one for a long time. F-Trader, I think, did a couple of code reviews, but F-Trader's been there with Bitcoin ABC from the beginning. F-Trader, on the other hand, also came out against the IFP and wanting to have an alternate piece of software that's Bitcoin ABC based. He created a fork of Bitcoin ABC called Bitcoin ABC Node, which is very confusing. But basically, it removes the IFP from Bitcoin ABC. So that's, turnabout is fair play, right? Emery removed SegWit and added big blocks. F-Trader is doing the same thing to Emery. So as it stands, the clients will fork permanently 10 blocks after the IFP comes into play in May. This means that there will be 2 BCH coins about a month after their halving. So remember that their halving is in April of 2020. Bitcoin's halving is sometime in May, but about a month after that, they're going to split. So I don't know what that does to price or whatever, but it's going to be an interesting and fun thing to watch. We have a slow-moving car crash happening over the next 3 months. So just to give you an idea, essentially you have one group, and that is whom I would call Bitcoin West or something like that. This is Roger Ver, Peter Risen, F-Trader, I guess the Bitcoin.com mining pool, and some others that are and the people of RBTC, more or less, that are on one side. And then you have BCH East. These would be the people from a lot of the miners in China, obviously, Jihan Wu, Zhang Zhuer, and that Via BTC guy, along with Amory Sachet. So you have these two groups, and it looks like they're going to split, but who knows? I mean, you never know what's going to happen in this space. So what are the lessons to be learned here? First, miners don't control anything. We know from 2x that miners are more beholden to economic reality than anything else. One of the reasons why Bitcoin 2x didn't go through was because the miners would only give the 2x supporters a guarantee of running 2x software for about a day, because they knew that they would suffer massively. They have to pay their bills, and they weren't going to do something that wasn't economically rational. Any exertion of control costs the miners money, and given the small margins, this is not something most miners consider worthwhile. Second, the community matters. BCHers were sold on a lie that miners decided to chain and not any individuals. They are now coming to the realization that the community, or the users who hold the coins, should get to decide, and that means running their own node. And they're having a split over it, right? Like they basically were saying, oh, the miners should control things. They get to vote. They should have an equal say on this stuff. That's not how it was, right? And now their turnabout is kind of coming and hitting them. Third, once decentralization is given up, anything goes. Taxes are on the table. New inflation is on the table. Forceful redistribution is on the table. You cannot take good centralization and avoid bad centralization. The bad comes with the good, and the bad is quite bad while the good is marginal at best. So basically, they let in this Trojan horse of centralization in exchange for what they wanted, which was bigger blocks and removal of SegWit. The good was marginal at best. It was probably actually a negative. But the bad that entered was centralization, and that's led to one chain split, and it's going to lead to probably another chain split. And that's the real lesson here, is that you do not let in centralization at any cost. It is literally what separates Bitcoin from everything else, at least that's digital, including the US dollar and many altcoins. And if you give that up, everything else starts coming on the table, including taxes and inflation and forceful redistribution. I'm on record this past weekend, having been at Unconfiscatable, telling people that, I think Craig S. Wright's endgame is forceful redistribution of Satoshi's coins to himself. That kind of like ledger manipulation is totally on the table when you have centralization. All right, so let's go on to some other stories. Multi-sig security for Bitcoin removes single points of failure for those that want to hold their own keys. In this post by Unchained Capital, they go over the benefits of multi-sig and promise a series of posts that will explore this idea thoroughly. I'm definitely looking forward to this, but it's from Unchained Capital, and they're going to make the argument for why multi-sig, what's going on right now. It looks like most people have like a single point of failure with their single key. And using something like multi-sig should be much, much better. So they're going to talk about all of this stuff, visualizing multi-sig addresses, how multi-sig addresses are created, derived, how spending from multi-sig works, function of XPubs, confirming control and ownership of multi-sig addresses, managing state and multi-sig, differences between multi-sig and collaborative custody, and more. So all really, really interesting topics. And if you care about the security of your own coins, this is something that you should definitely pay attention to. All right, next, Zane Popak has written on looking at Bitcoin from a different perspective, that of a communications medium. Explores Bitcoin from the perspective of information theory, because it's not really a commodity in any physical sense. It's a good example of why the metaphysical nature of Bitcoin does not lend itself to easy categorization. So the nature of Bitcoin is what it's called, from Zane Popak. And he argues that it's a means of communication. And communication in that sense is very metaphysical, right? It doesn't necessarily, there can be like pieces of paper that you use to communicate and so on, but the actual concepts are all metaphysical. It's not in the physical realm. And that's, I think, the main thing that he's pointing out here. Bitcoin is very literally in the metaphysical realm. All of the machines, the physical work that's done by miners and so on, it's to find something metaphysical, which is a number, which in itself is kind of a crazy thing if you think about it. Great article about talking about sort of the metaphysical nature of Bitcoin, which I think is what this article is really about. Definitely worth reading. There's an interesting parallel between bimetallism and Bitcoin, which Larry White talks about in this article. So Larry White wrote this on talking about bimetallism and all of that. But it's a critique of something else, actually. Basically, it's talking about how bimetallism, if you haven't studied history, this is actually a pretty good primer. Essentially, in the late 1800s, there was quote unquote a shortage of gold. Really, it was banks that were issuing fractional reserve gold, and that caused a sort of semi-inflation. So no one actually wanted to use like real gold. And in order to fix this, they wanted to monetize silver in such a way to be favorable to silver. So people would only use silver. So they had like a 16-to-1 fixed ratio on silver, and they wanted more money supply out there. It was really an argument for inflation. And there's a lot of that going on within the Bitcoin space too. And this is a good exploration of some of the parallels around that. All right, Jeremy Rubin continues to push for object template verify, this time with research. The simulation shows that there's less block space used and confirm more transactions. If you haven't run the simulation, I haven't run the simulations yet, but he's done a bunch of batching simulations and what happens as people start adopting check template verify and so on, and it looks pretty good. It does seem to use the block space more efficiently and so on. Applications for chain code residency for summer 2020 are now open. It's an amazing program. I've had a ton of my students go through it. And a lot of them have become core developers. If you're a developer that wants to contribute to Bitcoin, applying to this program is a must. So, please apply if you're a Bitcoin developer or interested in any way, shape, or form. It's an excellent program, really high quality instruction, and you do hands-on coding all the time. All right, Han has written a nice guide to Bitcoin investing using retirement accounts here. He goes through 3 options, including self-directed IRA, Bitcoin index funds, and Bitcoin IRA custodian. If you have retirement accounts and want to invest the money in Bitcoin, this may be a good place to start. So, I'm not an accountant or anything, but if you do have retirement accounts, if you have a 401k or a self-directed IRA or something like that, like figuring out how to do it, I think is well worthwhile, because you don't want to lose the upside on doing that. Rusty Russell has proposed an elegant messaging protocol using the Lightning Network. So we'll talk about this. This is going to be my long read today. It's the direct messaging protocol that he's proposing, and I'll go over all of the replies and what they talk about during my long read. Coinmetrics has published an interesting analysis of the different networks and the wealth distribution on each. This may be saying something about the role of whales in the economy of each. Not surprisingly, Bitcoin is the most well distributed in that it has 11% of its supply being held by whales, which is defined as addresses that hold more than 1,000th of the supply. Whereas XRP has 85% and XLM has 95%. The artificial supply restrictions on coins like XLM and XRP probably has a strong manipulative effect on price, and these whales essentially act as central banks for these coins. So if you look at the actual article, there's a methodology, and it talks about a lot of coins besides the three that I mentioned. But Bitcoin, most of it is actually fairly well distributed. Ethereum is less well distributed. I think these addresses hold 40% of Eth supply, 46% on Litecoin, 14% on BCH. BSV is like 24%. Ripple and Stellar seem the worst. But basically, when you have whales like that, they act as de facto central banks. And that's because they can sell when it's high and buy when it's low. And because they have such a large supply and sort of a war chest from selling when it's high, they can do stuff like that. Trezor has published an article on the economic effects of the halving. This article specifically rejects the stock-to-flow model for Bitcoin pricing and argues essentially for the efficient market hypothesis. So I didn't find this very convincing, and in fact, there really aren't that many arguments in here, other than, the inflation is going to fall to 1.8%. Really, it should be monetary expansion. Inflation, as most people use the term, is really CPI. Demand having attraction and so on. I honestly didn't find the argument in this very compelling, but I wanted to include it because the stock-to-flow model that Plan B gave, to me, still presents the most compelling valuation model for Bitcoin. And I try to balance it out by reading some of the critiques of it. I haven't found one that is actually pretty that's compelling. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting article. You should definitely read it. I really like this article from Liberty Blitzkrieg, and it's talking about like essentially what the role of debt is and how debt is different for poor people versus rich people. And I summarized it here. Debt enslaves poor people while rich use debt for leverage and they get even richer. And the article summarizes how the Cantillon effect works in the current fiat system. The Cantillon effect is that the first printers or the first users of the money get all of the benefits. Well, the rich people have significantly more access to newly printed money, essentially because they have quote unquote great credit, and they're able to borrow some insane amounts of money, which is all newly printed money that they can use on bets that they know are going up as a result of the newly printed money, stuff like stock market and real estate. And if you leverage correctly, you can make tons of money. I heard recently that Mike Bloomberg in 2008 was worth about $4 billion. Now he's like worth 60 billion or something like that. How did he get all that money? Well, all the money printing, right? Like there's insane amounts of money printing that happened since 2008, and people like Mike Bloomberg benefit hugely from stuff like that. All right, Jameson Lopp has written about home defense. So great article here. That makes you think about, okay, you can't just secure your Bitcoins. You have to also secure yourself and your home. And so these are all the things that he thinks about, and he's definitely thought a lot about it. So worth reading. I'm definitely going to take some of those things into consideration. All right, BZX, a DeFi product on Ethereum, has been exploited twice in a week, resulting in about $1 million of loss. They've stopped the decentralized service, as it were. The details are still being worked out, but essentially some enterprising smart contract lawyers managed to make that money by flash crashing a thin market and taking advantage of the rules of flash loans, as they are called. Not a surprise that an unaudited, complex smart contract would be taken advantage of like this. Contracts like this are very vulnerable, and this has been clear since the days of the DAO. The attack surface and complexity tends to be very large, and this is a great example of why such products tend to be so vulnerable. So BZX is like a flash loan thing, and some people figured out how to borrow and pay back in the same contract and make a bunch of money in between. So I mean, this is kind of crazy, but this is what happens when you have unaudited smart contracts. Ethereum ENS service, which lets you register names, leaks a lot of data. And you've seen this on Twitter, somebody.eth or something like that. They're all ENSs, and essentially that makes it easy for you to pay somebody. Now it's a completely centralized service, of course, but and as a result, but it's on the Ethereum blockchain, so you have all of the vulnerabilities of centralization. If you register Coca-Cola.eth and it becomes popular and Coca-Cola sues, you're probably screwed out of it anyway, just like a centralized system. But it also has all the vulnerabilities. All the publicness of a blockchain. So they basically went through all of the addresses and figured out who owned how much Ethereum, which, because they're on an account-based system, it's harder to create new accounts and so on. So they figured out that Joe Lubin has like 83,000 Ethereum, for example. So kind of crazy. Not a good idea to use Ethereum. I had a wonderful time at Unconfiscatable. I moderated a developer panel with Adam, Jack, and Peter. We talked about Taproot, Lightning, sidechains, confidential transactions, and a lot of other things. I tried to see if Adam and Jack would bite on sidechains versus Lightning as like second layer technologies and stuff like that. But yeah, hopefully it's something that you find useful. Second, I participated in the last panel of the day, which was all about why altcoins will die. It's a good summary of the different ways in which altcoins are vulnerable. I also talked about Taproot and did a read-through of AJ's response last week, which I put there. And I did a read-through of BIP 178 this past week, which is extended from Callie Wolf on Twitter. My next event is Bitcoin 2020 and the Programming Blockchain Seminar. So Bitcoin 2020 is happening in San Francisco. Whoops, I think I must have linked that wrong, so I'll have to go and change that. But Bitcoin 2020 conference, I think, is the website. So let's now go through my Twitter feed and comment on some of the tweets that I've made in the past week and try to explain them. This the part of the show where I explained to you some of the more unpopular tweets and why I tweeted them. All right. So Taproot Schnorr will add a lot of privacy. You won't be able to tell by the output anything about the conditions which will allow someone to spend it. It could be single key, multi-key, or a time lock key event. Huge win in my opinion. So this is something that I've been saying about Taproot, is that the distinction between pay to pub key hash, pay to script hash, pay to witness pub key hash, pay to witness script hash, those disappear. You only have one address. You have no idea whether it's single key, multi key, or KFN, or something more exotic. If it's time locked or whatever, it could be anything, and essentially makes everything kind of like pay to script hash, except the savings are all there because of Greg Maxwell's brilliant Taproot stuff. That's what I'm saying there. Some tips on architecting software: unit tests, iterate, and be ruthless. So this came up because I'm working on sort of a multi-sig wallet with time locks and stuff like that, and oh my goodness, I've had to refactor a ton of stuff. So. It's a lot of work, but I'm really enjoying it. I am a coder at heart, and like getting to do a lot of that is very, very nice. Calling all GitHub users, rotate your SSH key on GitHub, make some Bitcoin. So this is something that my friends and I found, and it's basically Handshake Coin or something. I think it's by the JJ, the guy that did Bitcoin or something like that. That's like the JavaScript implementation of the Bitcoin core software. But yeah, it's basically you get like zero point zero 0.09 BTC, or it was. I think it's crashed a lot since then because enough people have kept doing this. So yeah, go claim yours. I'm not going to say whether or not I did, but I think that's a good idea. We will never see Bitcoin have less than 1 million followers. Not a very popular tweet. We will never see one Bitcoin be less than 1/21 millionth of total Bitcoin. I was trying to be clever there. Didn't really work, I guess. Fiat forces you to worship money or be damned to a destitute existence. Bitcoin rescues you from such preoccupation with money. And this is something that I've noticed, is that in a fiat world, we are all completely obsessed with money, right? Like, you have to be in order to keep up. There is no real savings because that savings is being drawn down through inflation, like on a yearly basis. So it's pretty bad. So you have to be obsessed with money in order to just even survive. And this is kind of a sad thing because like. There were people in the past that would work hard for, some number of years, save up, and then they would devote themselves to intellectual pursuits. And oftentimes that would be some of the most fruitful things that they would add to humanity. Or, they would concentrate on doing stuff that they felt was important. And fiat money sort of prevents you from doing that because of all the energy, pun intended, that you have to put in towards keeping the money that you have. Altcoins leeching off of Bitcoin's hard money property since 2011. Blockchain leeching off of Bitcoin's decentralization since 2014. Remember, folks, there's a lot of rent seekers in the Bitcoin space that need pruning before we can fry the big fish. Yeah, just my take on it is that altcoins are really trying to ride off of Bitcoin, and so are blockchains. And there's an interesting article about how Ethereum is actually like correlates best not to their own stock to flow or network usage or anything, but to Bitcoin's stock to flow. So they're literally kind of like, well, not literally, they're leeching off of it. This tweet nails crypto. Crypto is simple. Either become the best in the world at trading, convince everyone that your altcoin is better than Bitcoin, overpay for hype, or market useless centralized crap. Most think they do one or two when it's actually three or four. And, this is, a common sort of meme that was going around. VC is simple. Either become really good at identifying mispriced assets, convince incredible founders to take lower valuations, pay top of market, or make mediocre bets. Most VCs are actually doing three or four and not one or two. All right, let's see. I did a brief with Tone. I read through a whiff, the BIP about extended whiffs. Fiat money makes honest living difficult. Cheating, stealing, scamming are so common as to almost be taught in business school. So many people are used to rent seeking that they see nothing wrong. Bitcoin fixes this. And yeah, this is related to the other one where you kind of have to be obsessed with money. And once you get obsessed with money, you start kind of cheating people, right? Because in order to make money, it's oftentimes easier to cheat people than to provide them with a real good or service. And this sort of thing is now being taught in business school. Like some of the best business models now are subscription businesses, which in a sense is kind of fundamentally dishonest because it keeps you like paying without you opting in, right? And it's a way to sort of like cheat people a little bit in case they forget about it and like slowly drain their money. And that sort of thinking is endemic throughout the economy, and most of us don't really even realize it because it's so prevalent. 30 years from now, I'll be telling my grandchildren about how I was helping the Bitcoin in the heady days of 2020. Blockchain experts and ICO token shillers will still be running from their past. How will you look back on what you're doing now? This is my most popular tweet this week, and I'd like to think that by 2020, like 2050 or something like that, 30 years from now, I'll still be telling my grandchildren about like shows that I was doing. There are other people that will be running from their past, that will be still tarred with, with all of the scamming that they did in the altcoin and ICO space. And that's something that I think everyone should think about, is their long-term legacy as a result of this stuff. Confession. I don't think I really understood op check sequence verify until today. Of course, coding will do that. So I had to go implement check sequence verify for the software that I'm working on, and I really didn't understand it. I always wondered why BIP68 and BIP112 were two separate things. Now I do. BIP68 implements a soft fork rule that says, hey, you need to check sequence if it's version 2, and if it's not, if the current block time or block height is not high enough, then then it can't go in the block. And BIP 112 is the op check sequence verify opcode. So yeah, it was an enlightening experience, and I love how code sort of makes things real. Self-sovereign is another way of saying that security doesn't depend on third parties. Bitcoin is self-sovereign. Fiat, altcoins, blockchain projects, ICOs, DeFi are all not. And that's the thing. If you are if you don't depend on third parties, that's something that you can do on your own. All of these other things depend on third parties. All I want is a multi-sig time lock wallet that works with existing hardware wallets. Is that too much to ask? And Jameson just said no. Yes, that is too much to ask. I'm working on it. All right, unconfiscatable is live. Verify, don't trust. The reason people would rather trust is because of laziness. Laziness is a big security hole. And sadly, this is true of many people. Now, that's not the only reason people trust. Maybe they did do due diligence to some degree or whatever. But most people, I think it's laziness. Sunday survey. What percent of your holdings would you trust on your favorite exchange for 6 months? Most people said 1 to 10%. I think that's about the right amount. Zero, at least the exchanges currently, most of them haven't been hacked to a large for most of their money. So 6 months is like a reasonable amount time frame. Being rich is not a great signal of much. You could have inherited it. Having made money is also not a great signal. Especially in a fiat economy, because rent-seeking is so profitable. Why people conflate those with virtue is beyond me. Now, people thought I was subtweeting about a Trace Mayer or something. I was actually subtweeting Warren Buffett. That's he's the big one that I don't think is he's been a rent seeker, honestly. He moves money around. I mean, what value is he adding other than moving money around? He hasn't funded great startups or anything like that. So to me, he's a rent seeker of the first order, and he's made a lot of money, granted, but I don't know why people give him so much respect on all sorts of other things, what do you think of this technology or something like that. Really, he has no clue. He's very good at moving money around. That's his expertise. F in a nutshell, X equals smart contracts, ICOs, DeFi, Ethereum 2.0. Claim X will enable entirely new businesses and paradigms. And then when that runs out, change X, market the heck out of it, get money from suckers, rinse and repeat. So new narrative comes in every few months, and that's their thing. I still can't explain their fashion choices though. So it's about it for the tweets for this week. All right, let's see if there are any questions before I do a long read of the direct messaging stuff. All right, let's see. Does the creation of the Bcash node software give more validity to running your own node on the Bitcoin network and UASF? Well, it gives a lot more validity to running your own node, period, just from the whole drama itself, not necessarily the Bcash node software. What they're doing is the stated goal anyway was there are Bcash vendors that are running Bitcoin ABC. They're like, here's your drop-in replacement. Instead of upgrading to Bcash, 18.0 or whatever the version number is, upgrade to ours, and you'll get all of the same benefits, except you don't have to pay the IFP. What is the objective of miners? To make more money. Yes, that's correct. The purge is coming. What? I don't know what that is. Do evil and you will be rewarded in cash. What is the plan, really? All right, that's not it. What does Mimble Coin teach us about decentralization? It doesn't. It's just a shitcoin, isn't it? I don't know. They tried an airdrop or something. I haven't really paid attention. We not get an unconfiscatable poker recap video this year? Well, I didn't go to the tournament, so I have no idea what happened. So, yeah, but I think there were some pros there, so we'll see. All right, so based on that, let's go to the direct message draft from Rusty Russell. Hi all, it seems that messaging over Lightning is a thing, and I want to use it for the offers protocol anyway. The offers protocol is like another way to communicate, right? Like if you're doing any sort of negotiation, you right now on Lightning, you have to do it sort of offline. But he wants to make it so that you can do it within the Lightning Network itself with all of the inherent security that's on there, instead of using maybe an insecure channel. So I've come up with the simplest proposal I can and even implemented it. Importantly, it's unreliable. Our implementation doesn't remember across restarts, limits us to 1,000 total remembered forwards with random drop, and the protocol doesn't yet include a method for errors. This is much friendlier on nodes than using HTLC, which requires 2 round trips, signature calculations, and DB commits. So it is an obvious candidate for much more than just invoice requests. So essentially, the whole thing is inspired by this other thing. Let's see. So what's the thing that he's talking about? Well, it's WhatsApp, and this is something that's Juice Jager, I'm not really sure how to pronounce the name, but basically it's a messaging protocol over Lightning, and what it uses is HTLCs or hash time lock contracts to do the communication. Now that's good and everything, but it requires a round trip every time you wanna do it. You basically send a request for some payment for 0 sats, I think, and then they send back with that actual embedded message. So you have to do that each time. That's not very efficient. So Russell came up with a direct messaging protocol, and with sort of like the routing built in. Now that's the actual protocol, or that's the idea behind it. Anonymous developer ZMN SCPXJ had this to say. A concern I had brought up in the past is that if this is more than just a single request response, if this is a conversation where Alice sends to Bob, Bob sends back to Alice, and Alice sends back to Bob, and so on, then if the same path is used each time Alice sends to Bob, the timing from Bob's response to Alice to the next Alice sends to Bob can help an intermediate node guess how far away Alice is from itself. Obviously, timing from Alice sending to Bob and Bob replying gives a hint as well as to the distance the intermediate node is to Bob already. So, in other words, what ZMN SCPXJ is saying, or Z-Man is saying, is that right now, intermediary nodes during Lightning transactions, they have no idea what's going on, right? Like they are allowing some usage of their channel capacity in exchange for some fee. But as far as the endpoints are concerned, they have no idea. It's cryptographically sealed, more or less. But if you do this over and over with this direct message protocol, and you see frequent messages, you can take a guess at where the nodes are, and that's bad for security for a myriad of reasons. So that's what he's talking about with this concern. And Rusty actually replied back. I like it. The lack of reply function eliminates all storage requirements for the. This is the remedy that Z-Man came up with. By this I mean Alice would it not be better to create a circular path? By this I mean Alice constructs an onion that overall creates a path from herself to Bob and back, ensuring different nodes on the forward and return addresses. The onion hop at Bob reveals that Bob is the chosen conversation partner, and Bob forwards its reply via the onion return path. So, you're doing something like an HTLC, but there are some sort of technical reasons why that's a little more difficult. But Christian chimed in later and told us about what ways in which you can make that work on the Lightning Network. So really good stuff. I'm excited about the idea of like sort of end-to-end encrypted messaging via Lightning Network, because it's really decentralized, right? Like as long as you choose the path correctly, you know exactly who the intermediaries are. And the nice thing is they have no idea what the hell you're saying anyway. If you happen to be a very centralized node and you're only using them for the single hop or something like that, then they might get a clue that you're talking to somebody, but they really have no idea what the message is or anything else, and that's a hell of a lot better than what we have now. So I would love to see more of that going forward, and that's why I found it interesting. All right, so once again, the Little Bitcoin book is available on Amazon, on audio, on Kindle, on in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. Programming Bitcoin is available on Amazon as well. And my seminar, Programming Blockchain, is going to happen in San Francisco, March 25th, 26th, and Antwerp, Belgium, April 22nd and 23rd. I mentioned that I didn't really understand check sequence verify until I had to implement it. That's what this class is like, right? Once you're forced to implement it, you really have to understand it, and it's very hard to get away from not understanding it. Or continue with the class unless you understand it, and that's part of the whole deal. I won't have too much to say about other stuff, so it looks like everything is done. Well, it was fun. Fiat delenda est. This song is done.